Hey friends, it's Jasmine, and I hope that you all are doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I make witchy content and talk about the craft and paganism and folklore, all sorts of things here on this channel. So if you're into that sort of thing, definitely check out my channel, look at some of my other videos. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming back and welcome back. So as many of you know, I help run a book club called the Indie Witches Book Club. You can find it on Facebook. There's an online meetup and there's an in-person meetup. And we pick a book every other month to be our book club book. And the books are selected by the community and voted on from the community. And the book that has, the most votes is the book that we use for book club, which currently right now in book club, we are reading Backwoods Witchcraft. However, the other two options for book club were really, really good this go around as well. And one of the options actually was The Crooked Path by Keldon. So let me start off by just kind of saying that this book in some ways kind of really blew my mind. And it's funny how reading this book actually kind of felt like a coming home in a sense. Now, that's not to say that I would necessarily fully identify as like a trad witch or a traditional witch. I think that labels sometimes can be a little bit limiting, so I hesitate to really label myself or put myself in any sort of box. But this book definitely, a lot of it resonated for me, and I was shocked as to how much of the book was already a part of my practice. The Crooked Path. This is an introduction to traditional witchcraft, and it's written by Keldon. The first book that I've read from this author, so this is kind of my introduction to them as well as really my first book on traditional witchcraft. I think that, being a witch of the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, a lot of our books at the time were very Wiccan, and also like the whole New Age movement was, I feel like, definitely more prominent during that time period in literature as well as like popular culture. And that's not to say that the New Age movement isn't still relevant and isn't still around, because it is, but I'm finding that more and more occultists and more traditional witches, if you will, for lack of a better word, are feeling comfortable writing different sorts of material and kind of breaking from this Wiccan mold. So I wanted to really talk about The Crooked Path. So to be honest with you guys, this book for me was a 10 out of 10. And, there's a lot of books that I read. I am a big believer that smart witches thirst for knowledge. I have this cup that my grandmother gave me that says smart women thirst for knowledge. And I think that applies to witches as well. I think that there's this kind of connotation of the armchair witch and armchair witchery. And I think that, there's kind of this negative stereotype sometimes about being a well-read witch. And I think that comes from the place that there are folks out there who never leave the armchair. And I do think that that's a big disservice to your craft. But I also think that taking time to sit in the armchair and, educate yourself and read up on these latest and greatest occult books is really important. I think that if you're still practicing from books that were written in the 90s and you haven't read any modern material, I think that you're missing out, because a lot of these witches who are up and coming are writing really amazing books. And if you allow yourself to just kind of be stuck in a certain era, then I feel like your witchcraft, to a degree, is as well. I also very much think that witchcraft is very evolutionary in the sense that it's supposed to change over time. It's supposed to improve and strengthen and shift. And if your practice is not, to a degree, also shifting and changing, then I think that to some degree that's showing some stagnancy, and it's okay to reassess some of your beliefs, and it's okay to change some of those beliefs if those beliefs are no longer serving you. I myself, like early on in my practice, a lot of the material that I was looking at as far as organized thoughts on witchcraft was very Wiccan based, and there still to this day are some Wiccan elements in my practice that I would be lying to you if I said I did not incorporate. I also have other folk practices that I practice as well, and I've talked about that and shared that here on the channel. However, that isn't necessarily an organized witchcraft practice. And it's not always related to religion. And when I think of my personal religion, if you will, which I consider myself a witch first, and spirituality and religion kind of come secondary to that, but the craft really comes first for me. But if I had to pick like a religious label, I would personally identify and have identified as a pagan, as a kafir, as a heretic. There are many different deities that I honor and that I revere, and I would not consider myself to be traditionally Abrahamic in any way. I have some influence in my upbringing, Abrahamic influence, and there are some systems of magic that do work with and utilize Abrahamic aspects and work in Abrahamic spaces, but I don't consider myself necessarily to be anything other than a pagan. Part the thorny bramble and take a walk along the bewitchingly mysterious crooked path. Within these pages, discover a wealth of hands-on tips and techniques to begin your journey into the realm of traditional witchcraft. Learn to weave a powerful personal practice that is informed by folklore and grounded in your own location and natural landscape. Along the way, you will find valuable information regarding the tools and rituals and spells of this fascinating tradition, together with lessons on connecting with deities, familiar spirits, ancestors, and the spirits of a place. With supportive advice and encouragement, Keldon provides everything you will need to successfully navigate your own path, helping you master even advanced practices such as hedge crossing as you transform your day-to-day experience into a life filled with magic and spirit. So a little bit about the author here. Let me see if I can show you this. This is Keldon. Here's the author. Keldon has been practicing traditional witchcraft for more than a decade. He has writing that has appeared in The Witch's Altar and the Modern Witch magazine. Additionally, he also authors a blog on Patheos pagan channel called By a Fame and Staying. Keldon lives in Minnesota. So some things that I'm looking at when I'm reading books or when I'm reviewing books is how affordable are these books? What sort of knowledge is presented in these books? What kind of author is writing these books? Do I consider these books to be for the novice and the beginner, or would I consider this to be more of a advanced or even intermediate sort of book? Is there anything new that I've learned from the book? And I would say, like I've mentioned, I would personally give this book a 10 out of 10. I mean, I really think that anyone who is actively practicing witchcraft, whether you would consider yourself to be a traditional witch or not, could really, really benefit from this book, The Crooked Path. And I say that because even if you don't identify as a traditional witch, you will be very familiarized with what a traditional witch is. And that way, if you are interacting with other witches who do identify as a trad witch, you will understand exactly what they mean when they say that. Because one thing I kind of thought that Keldon very much kind of explained to me is when people say traditional witch, to what tradition necessarily, right? Like what really is traditional? Because every culture of every region and every country has their own sort of traditions. And in this particular book, Keldon talks about traditional witchcraft and what it is and defining what it is and how it uses a lot of folkloric influence and how it is separate from Wicca. There are some things that it definitely shares. In the book, this talks about the witch queen or the witch mother and the witch king or the witch father. And these sort of duotheistic archetypes are also found within Wicca and like the god and the goddess. And so that was something that I was already kind of familiar with. But one of the things that I really liked about Keldon's book here, The Crooked Path, was kind of talking about the witch's devil or witches working with the devil, because I think that for especially a lot of people who kind of grew up in the craft in this like highly influential Wiccan aspect in terms of books and literature, is one thing that was regurgitated all the time is that witches don't worship the devil, witches don't believe in the devil, witches don't work with the devil. And something that I think you will find, especially reading, you know, more modern texts or even just looking at historical grimoires, is that that is simply just not true. Witches do work with the devil. And what exactly is the devil? What is the witch king and the horned god and these sorts of overlaps? The devil in traditional witchcraft can very much be Abrahamic and can very much be the devil of the Christians. But the devil is also a kind of conglomeration of all of these different pagan, divine, masculine spirits and archetypes. The devil is the green man. The devil is also found in the Fey realms as well. Traditional witchcraft is kind of like this mixture of folkloric devils and the Fey, as well as, and Keldon kind of puts it really well in this book where he talks about how, you know, during witch trials and things of the sort, you know, pagan gods weren't necessarily mentioned because in the eyes of essentially Christianity, like they were all devils, right? So Keldon kind of talks about how the devil was kind of taken from witches and then rebranded by Christians and given back to witches as the devil. The horned god, the green man, Old Scratch, these are all various different archetypes for what the devil is. He's also known as like the man in black. This is something especially for personal reasons that this book really hit home with me. And there's something that I haven't really shared super publicly. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I will. But well before I even really had an actualization of what traditional witchcraft is, I had a extremely intense, vivid dream that still has stuck with me to this day. And I keep a dream journal, and I had written out this dream when it happened, and then I later, you know, typed it out and printed it and put it in my book of shadows, because I knew when I had this dream how truly influential it was going to be. And I didn't know at the time why or how, but I knew I would learn eventually why this was so influential for me. And essentially in this dream, in a nutshell, saw myself sort of in third person, and I watched myself enter into this wooded area and literally enter this like ring of toadstools. And when I got in the ring of toadstools, this spirit appeared before me. And I wasn't really sure at the time what this spirit really was. And in the dream, it had kind of the torso of a man, but the head of like a stag. And then the lower half below the torso was just kind of almost like a storm cloud. And in the dream, I did like this blood pact offering, and I like slit my hand and blood drips from my hand. And like I had carved the number like 14 into my hand. And when the blood fell from my hand and dropped onto the ground, it almost kind of like sizzled. Almost like, I don't know, it was being like burned away, or like hot magma hitting the ground. And that's basically the dream. I mean, there's some more specifics in my dream journal regarding it, but in a nutshell, that's essentially the dream. And something that I've come to find from reading Keldon's book is at the time when this dream happened, you know, initially thought, okay, this is some sort of blood pact, or like, is this just my subconscious mind kind of playing out, or was I really unconsciously traveling? Was I seeing my fetch, if you will, which is mentioned in this book, which a fetch is kind of like a mirror image of a witch's soul, or a fragment of the witch's soul, which I've talked about in a previous video. I've talked about like shape-shifting and taking the form of a serpent in astral travels. And so now I believe what I was seeing, because I was seeing it kind of in third party, I believe I really was seeing my fetch at this time. And this dream, I want to say, took place in maybe 2018, 2018, I believe it was. And I remember later that weekend, I had a festival booked where I was supposed to be there working at the festival. And the Wednesday, the Wednesday before the festival, I had gotten into a really intense automobile accident where I actually went through the windshield, which was a super crazy experience, and one that like is very liminal in a sense, because I remember having the accident, and I remember parts of kind of going through the windshield, and I remember like an ambulance coming, and I remember people screaming, I remember there being lots of blood, I remember going to the hospital, and then that's where it kind of checks out for me. And what ended up actually happening was, I don't have a history of seizures, but I had a seizure while driving, actually right around the corner from my house, and unfortunately I ended up hitting another vehicle, and everyone was totally fine. But yeah, I had a seizure, and when I was having my seizure, obviously I kind of blacked out, and my foot was hitting the gas, and I had hit another vehicle. And the driver of the other vehicle, totally fine. It was mostly me who was just injured. And at this time, I didn't really put two and two together until later I realized that this accident actually happened 14 months from when I put my dream in the Google document. So that seemed kind of like a lineup for me. And also this accident when I was in the hospital, I actually am lucky to be alive, which I've had a couple experiences in my life in terms of near-death experiences. So it wasn't my first, and that's why I have like this 9 lives tattoo on my wrist, because it's kind of a joke amongst people who know me, is that I have like 9 lives, which I think we're down to like 5 now. But yeah, the doctor was shocked that, for one, I was alive when I got to the hospital, considering how extreme the accident was. And for 2, when I got to the hospital, they did some scans and they found that I actually had an acute brain bleed. And so they wanted to keep me overnight in the hospital, just to kind of monitor me and make sure that, you know, I was going to be all right. And they said that typically with these sorts of brain bleeds, they typically get worse. So they don't typically like just get better. And that's why they wanted to keep me overnight, because if they had to go in and do something, they might be able to do something if they were able to monitor it. And overnight, within less than 24 hours, my brain bleed just completely disappeared. And it was almost as if I had never been in an accident. Now, going through a windshield, you definitely have chunks of glass stuck in your scalp. I had glass in my eyes and my forehead and my scalp that had to be picked out and taken out. But other than that, I really didn't have any physical injuries. I was lucky to not break any bones, and the brain bleed went away in less than 24 hours overnight in the hospital. And the doctor was shocked and almost a little bit confused. So I was discharged from the hospital, went home, told just kind of take it easy for a couple of days, and I did. And later I realized that, okay, this accident is somehow connected to this dream. And in reading Keldon's book more, and also just into looking into more traditional witchcraft, I'm actually kind of coming to the realization that I feel like my fetch, the mirrored reflection of my witch's soul, made a pact with the devil as a way to save my life. And I think that time is very wibbly wobbly, and how all that works out, how my future fetch mirrored reflection self did that to save my past self that was the present self at the time. Don't exactly know how to explain all that in terms of cosmology wise, but I genuinely believe that in the astral, my fetch made a deal with the devil to make sure that I would survive this car accident, or for protection. And I think that my relationship with the devil, if you will, is one that I'm interested in exploring further. And, you know, left-hand path sorts of ideology isn't necessarily out of my comfort zone or out of my practice to begin with. So I will have to let you know where this develops further now that I'm kind of putting an official name to it. Anyway, back to the book that I've rambled enough. I think Keldon did a really great job. There are lots of really good recipes in here, and Keldon does a really, really good job about just breaking the book down in terms of what is traditional witchcraft and what is the crooked path. Also, I just think the artwork is very visually appealing and stunning. Keldon has been practicing traditional witchcraft for more than a decade. In addition to being the co-creator of the Traditional Witches deck, his writing has appeared in The Witch's Altar, The New Aradia, A Witch's Handbook to Magical Resistance, Modern Witch Magazine. Furthermore, he authors a blog on Pathos called A Thame and Stag, like I mentioned earlier. And in his free time, Keldon enjoys reading, hiking, growing poisonous plants, and playing the ukulele.
Sounds like my kind of friend.
I also think that Keldon's writing style is one that's very easy to digest, and it's not super like textual in the sense that like there are some grimoires or some occult books that almost kind of feel like college grade reading level, which is fine, but this one is very enjoyable. It feels almost like Keldon is talking to you one-on-one, and you're just kind of sitting with a friend and they're sharing this tradition with you. The book is also broken up into multiple different parts. So the first part is, what is traditional witchcraft? Defining traditional witchcraft and the historical development of traditional witchcraft. And I think that it's very obvious when you are reading this first part that like Keldon has really done a lot of work here, not only really like researching himself, but also putting it in layman's terms, which I really appreciate. Part 2 is working with magic. So magical basics, the traditional witches' tools, the rituals of traditional witchcraft and spellcraft. And a lot of this, I will be honest, in part 2 for me, as someone who has been practicing witchcraft, a lot of this was a lot of foundational kind of basic information, which is great for a beginner reader. And so I would definitely recommend anyone who's new to witchcraft to check this book out, in the sense that it does have a lot of foundational information. However, I wasn't super aware with some of these traditional witches rituals, like laying the compass or treading the mill. And so reading about that was really fascinating, because to treading the mill, that is something that I have been doing in my practice for probably about the past 7 years. And it's something that our coven has been doing for about the past 3.5 years, especially around the spring equinox, which is coming up. So it was like a lot of things were just like lining up for me. Part 3, working with the other world, the witch father and the witch mother, which I kind of talked about how that sort of resonated with me in terms of like my work with the devil and making blood pacts with the devil. Chapter 8, ancestors, familiars, and fetches. If you watch one of my previous videos, I talk about shape-shifting, and that's also a form of fetch spirit. Visualizing your spirit lifting from your body, floating out of your home, opening doors, closing them and locking them. It could also be a familiar as well. And I really like how Keldon in his ancestor portion talks also about the mighty dead, which has been a part of my practice. And the mighty dead are working with the spirits of witches, essentially, who have come before you. So not necessarily bloodline ancestors, but magical ancestors. And that's been a part of my practice, and it's been a part of my Witches' Day of the Dead, my Samhain, for a long time. However, he recommended a book by Christopher Penczak called The Magic of Ancestors, or Ancestor Magic, or Ancestors of the Craft is what it's called. And I want to check that book out because I haven't read it, and there are some works that Christopher Penczak has put out that I do like, and so I would like to check out that book, Ancestors of the Craft. He also talks about the other world, and he talks about the upper world. He talks about the mid-world. He talks about the underworld. And a lot of these sort of correspondences really match up for me personally as far as my own understanding of cosmology. You guys know on my podcast, As the Cauldron Bubbles, I've been talking a lot to Nora Estradia about cosmology and about connecting to this dark matter, this dark mother sort of planetary cosmic current. So a lot of this really checked out as far as how the worlds are sort of set up. The next part is working with the natural landscape, working with the land around you. You can go back in my channel and look at videos I've made talking about working with the spirits of the land. And this is something that's been important to me in my practice as someone who is residing on land that I am not native to, and connecting to this land and honoring this land and this land's cycles and seasons and the indigenous spirits of this land, the genus loci, if you will, and working more with that it was very affirming that this is a part of a traditional practice, or this is a part of a practice, and this is not just something that Jasmyne is doing. Not that there's anything wrong with UPG, because there's not, and that's where leaving the armchair is so beneficial, is building your own UPG, and you do need to have UPG. But there are definitely times where, and maybe some of you can relate to this, where as a witch I feel called just to do something. And maybe that is some of my claircognizance, that divine knowing, or even clairaudient, where almost like I feel like I'm being whispered to or guided. But there are times in my practice where I just feel called to do something, and I know it's the right thing to do, and it feels right, and I don't necessarily have an explanation for it. And so a lot of Keldon's work was very confirming for me in terms of my own practice. That's something else that Keldon does, is reflecting on the crooked path and establishing your own traditional witchcraft practice, especially if they have different sort of genus loci, if they have different land spirits. I also like how he pulled from various different pagan mythologies and lore. He talks about the Baba Yaga in this book. He talks about the Landvatir in this book. And he kind of has a lot of different influences in this traditional witchcraft. And I love, love, love the folkloric aspect to this book. And I also, in the part of the book where he talks about the witch father, from the Black Book, there is this recipe for the devil's bread. And when I got to that part in the book, I immediately had to stop what I was doing. It was like 9 o'clock at night on a Monday, on the moon's day, if you will. And I stopped what I was doing and I went to go make that bread. I had everything I needed to make this bread, and I decided I was going to make the devil's bread. And there are oats in this bread, which is different for me. It was kind of fun. It made the bread like thicker and a lot heartier than I was expecting. And I actually had it with some strawberry preserves. That was so, so good. Overall, I think this is a phenomenal book. I think that if you're interested in traditional witchcraft, like the book says, this is a great introduction to traditional witchcraft that breaks down the crooked path in layman's terms, which is hard to come by, I feel, in some occult books. Finding things broken down easily in layman's terms, I appreciate that so much. If you aren't necessarily interested in traditional witchcraft, I find this to be really beneficial as well, because I think that as a witch, one of the best things you can do is keep yourself educated and up to date on what is going on in the occult world, whether it be new orders and covens and traditions popping up. I think it's important to stay up to date. And I think, like I've mentioned before, smart witches thirst for knowledge. In terms of readability, I would give this book a 10 out of 10. It's very easy to read, very easy to digest, and I spent many an evening laying here in my office on my futon, listening to some soft piano music playing in the background, drinking a ginger ale, and reading this book with some comfy fuzzy socks and a warm blanket, and it was a delightful experience. It's also very affordable. I would not consider this to be, you know, a super expensive, hard to find occult text. I mean, I got this for less than 20 bucks on Amazon. It got to me in less than 2 days. In terms of, do I feel like this is a good book for a beginner witch? Yes, I do. I think that there's a lot of very foundational practices that are in this book that even if you are more of an intermediate or experienced witch, you will find things in this book that, you know, resonate with you or that confirm things for you. I know that it did for me. I also really enjoyed the laying the compass ritual, and I enjoyed that the treading the mill ritual was something that other witches were actually doing. That was very confirming for me. And his passage in here about fetch spirits was also very confirming for me as well. Shape-shifting and astral work, hedge crossing has been a part of my practice, but this has definitely kind of organized my thoughts a little bit more on the matter. And moving forward, I'm excited to kind of do some of these exercises in the book in terms of working with the upper world. I was actually talking to Taya just the other night about this book, and I know that they are working on some other world exercises as well. And so I would like to also kind of get into this myself. The fetch spirit part for me has come well before I even was like really connected to this sort of tradition. So I think that that's interesting. At this time, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a traditional witch. I would say that I'm traditional witch leaning, or maybe even traditional witch adjacent, but I don't want to necessarily say I'm a traditional witch. And that's just for my own reasons as far as labels go. Overall, you guys, I would definitely recommend checking out this book, giving it a read. And if you do, please comment down below and let me know what you think. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy sharing these sort of book reviews with you all, and I hope that you enjoy them too. One of the things that I've been doing lately in my videos is kind of like making a secret word. And this is a word that I would like you to comment down below and leave it in the comment section as a way for me to know that you've watched this video. For this video, the word is going to be devil. Somewhere in your comment that you leave down below, I want you to use the word devil in your comment. And I don't want you to mention that it's the secret word, because it's kind of like a fun activity between you viewers and I, and it's kind of like a nod to like, hey girl, I've watched your whole video. And I really enjoy kind of like deciphering people's comments and seeing if they have the secret word in their comments. So comment down below, devil. Also, I just got these nails done. Do we love it? It's like a vampy red. The camera doesn't really pick these up super well, but they're actually kind of like a dark base with like a red glitter on top, but on camera they just look like a glittery scarlet red. But they are much more vampy in person, and it's kind of sad that they're not picking up on camera. Make sure that you check out all of my links down below in the description. I will also link Keldon's book on Amazon as well. Phenomenal book. Love this book. Honestly, Keldon, you knocked this book out of the park. I'm really excited to look at your book called The Witch's Sabbath. I enjoyed kind of the breakdown between the Sabbats and the Sabbath and how they are different. And I want to look at that book next. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and a special thank you to all of you who support me on Patreon. I would definitely not be able to do this without you. Thank you all so much. And until next time, blessed be, and I'll see you in hell.